So this morning, I want to go over a particular scripture written right here. Matthew 24. Now, as you know, Matthew 24, it goes through from the very beginning, at the time of destruction of the temple, which was in the year 70 on the Roman calendar, up until the time of the very, very, very end. This is a summary of the whole thing. And here, after he warns them about time frames, or not time frames, but the steps in which things would happen to bring the time to the end. It says right here in verse 36, but the day and the hour knows no man, not even the angels, but his Father only. But as in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days when they were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be, etc. Now, this one, verse 45, this is what I want to cover this morning. Who is that faithful and wise servant whom his master has made ruler over his household? Who is his household? Well, that would be the people of Israel. Would it not? Who ended up being the ruler over the people of Israel? Wasn't it the Gentiles? Wasn't it the Romans? I ask a question. To give them meat in due season. Oh, so if they, the ones who he made ruler over his household Israel, gave the people of Israel meat in due season, then blessed is that servant when his master comes and shall find so doing. Verily I say unto you, that he shall make him ruler over all his goods. And if that evil servant shall say in his heart, my master delays his coming. And as we read in Romans 11, you will see that the Gentiles, the Romans, were supposed to share jointly with Israel, equally with the Jews, the goodness of the root of the olive tree. You see? The evil servant shall say in his heart, my master delays his coming, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunken. And the Lord of that servant, the master of that servant, shall come in a day when he is not looking for him, in an hour he is not aware of. Why? Because he was not watching. And shall cut him asunder, and appoint his portion with the hypocrites, so shall weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, in the days of Noah after the flood, when the blessings were handed out to the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, or Japheth as the Anglos would call him, Shem and Japheth were given a joint blessing. Did you know this? Who were the sons of Japheth? That would be the Europeans and the Russians. Who were the sons of Shem? That would be Israelites, the Persians, the Iranians, the Iraqis, and partly the Arabs. Did I cover them all? Yes, I do believe I did. All right? Let's go to Genesis. Genesis 9. Let me explain a few things here. Verse 20. After the flood, Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunk, and he was uncovered inside his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and covered him up and did not tell his brothers what was going on. That's what he should have done. But he uncovered the nakedness of his father to his two brothers by informing them what happened, what he saw, rather than just covering them up and leave it be. For that, he was his son Canaan was cursed. And he told his two brethren outside. So he saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brethren outside and didn't do anything about it. What did Shem and Japheth do? They took a garment and laid it upon their shoulders and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. They did the right thing. And Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done unto him. So why was Canaan cursed? Well, we don't really know why, do we? We can surmise. Maybe he did not want all of Ham's children to be cursed. But Ham and his children received no blessing. A servant of servants shall Canaan be unto his brethren. Then he says this, and blessed be not the Lord God of Shem, but Jehovah Elohim of Shem. Jehovah Elohim of Shem. Canaan shall be his servant. Elohim will enlarge Japheth. It says allure. What does that mean, enlarge? Oh, spacious, wide open, pathah. So they will have great amounts of land, the greatest in the world, and they do. They do. More than any group of people. And he will settle down and abide in the tent of Shem. In other words, share jointly with something, with Shem. Any idea what that might mean, folks? And Canaan will be his servant. All right. This is what Paul was talking about in Romans 11. Who was he talking to? He was talking to the Romans, obviously, in Romans 11. Verse 17, and if some of the branches were broken off, and you being a wild olive tree were grafted in with them, and partaking jointly of the root and the fatness of the olive tree with who? certain sons of Shem, Israel, the Jews. That would be what was supposed to happen with Japheth. Japheth would become greater than Shem, as we see right here in Genesis 9 and verse 27, will enlarge, make wide open the tents of Japheth, and he will dwell in the tents of Shem. In other words, jointly will be together as one, and Canaan will be his servant. What happened? What happened? Japheth got too big for his britches. Japheth did not want to share jointly. Did not want to partake jointly of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. What did Japheth do? Japheth said that Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, was rejected, and that they, as the church, now replace Israel. They even have their EU flag up there, which is blasphemous. 12 stars, as if they are Israel. All right. Let's now go to this particular article in Jerusalem Post. This is all the way back in June 9, 2013 on the Roman calendar. Chapter 3, Early Solutions, Expulsions, Forced Conversion, and Death. Same thing that happened to my forefathers, and they accused my forefathers of being Jews. And so, as I pointed out in previous videos, I'll accept that accusation. I'll take it. In the past 1,000 years, 1 out of every 2 Jews born into the world has been murdered. By who? Here's the background. Centuries of persecution have sensitized the diaspora Jewry to the potential for danger in the times of social stress. In 1929, the Great Depression ignited embers of resentment that would feed the crematoria of Auschwitz. You see, when times of trouble come, the Gentiles, namely the sons of Japheth, always go back to the lie that the Jew is responsible for everything foul and evil upon the earth. And the 2009 Great Recession returned Western anti-Semitism to levels reportedly not seen since the Holocaust. Well, I wonder what the depression of 2020-2021 is going to lead to then. In the Middle Ages, the Black Plague intensified in a people already highly superstitious paranoia regarding the hand of Satan in their misfortunes, and the Jews were believed his instruments of their misfortune. Christians imagined Satan a living presence in the world. He was lurking in the shadows, hiding behind trees and wait. Now, this guy talks about the Gospel of John, describing the Jews as Satan's children, antichrist and agents of his malevolence in times of poor weather. Okay, so I want to dispel this right now. So we'll go to this particular book of John, where he's talking about. And first of all, dispel this name right here, Jesus, right now. It is not Jesus, it is Yehoshua, right here. It means Jehovah is salvation, or Jehovah's salvation. Yehoshua, let's see. We'll start here. And Yehoshua said to the Jews which believed on him, if you continue in my word, then you are my disciples. Okay, so it's reasonable to then agree that if the Gentiles continued in Jehovah's goodness, watch this. We'll go to Romans 11. Let's do a little match game here. But he's telling the Romans in verse 21, verse 20, be not high-minded, but fear, because if Jehovah spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare you not either. Look at the severity and the goodness of Jehovah. On them which fell severity, but toward you goodness, if you continue in his goodness. Otherwise you too will be cut off. Why was that generation cut off? That generation was cut off because their leaders handed him over to the Gentiles to be beaten and crucified. Okay? So we go back here. And then you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. They answered him, we be of Abraham's seed, and we were never in bondage to any man. How do you say you shall be free? Well, their answer to him was a grave error, because so are the Ishmaelites of Abraham's seed. Whoops. Yehoshua answered them, saying, verily, verily, I say unto you, whoso commits sin is a servant of sin, a slave. So he was explaining to them that if they follow him, Yehoshua, not Jesus, that they will be free from their sins. And it is backed up in the prophets. And the servant abides not in the house forever, but the Son abides forever. You see, if the Son, therefore, shall make you free, and he will make all Israel free, in spite of what the Gentiles say, you will be free indeed. I know that you are Abraham's seed. He acknowledges it. But you seek to kill me. You want to kill me, a fellow Jew. Let's go back to this particular article. When the plague arrived in Europe, the Jews were responsible for its spread. So said the Europeans. If a child went missing, he was kidnapped by the Jews. Oh, isn't this so common today in Europe, in Arab countries, in Iran, in Russia, and now even here in the United States? It's so common. Anti-Jewish persecution divides roughly into two periods. Before the year 1000, physical violence was mostly random. Why is that? Matthew 24. That's the reason why, right here. But if that evil servant shall say in his heart, my master delays his coming. Right, let's go back and look here. Wow. That was Jerusalem Post that did that, folks. So I have to go find out where I'm at. Individual on individual assault and murder. So that was random. The pre-millennium was characterized by Torah burnings, church-ordered Jew clothing, and badges in ghettos in general. The sought-after solution to the Jewish problem involved fulfilling Scripture by conversion, not by murder. But following the disappointment of Jesus' failing expectations of the second coming at the year 1000. You see, folks, there you have it. When the year 1000 came and went, the master delays his coming. Just like this right here. Who was made greater than Israel? Japheth. It was written all the way back in Genesis 9. Who was that faithful and wise servant who his master has made ruler over his household, to give him meat in due season? That's what the Romans were supposed to do. That was what their job was, to care for the people of Israel until the time of the Gentiles come to an end. Care for them, clothe them, make sure they have jobs, make sure their families were safe. That's what their job was to do. Right here, we read it. And if he would have done it, blessed is that servant whom his master, when he comes, shall find so doing. And if you go to the next chapter, you will see right there in the very next chapter, backs it up. Let me show you. When verse 31, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory with all the holy angels with him, and he shall sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all the nations. That's the Gentiles. Go to Strong's Concordance. What is ethnos? What does it mean? Gentiles. So he's going to gather unto him all the Gentiles, and then he shall separate them one from another, as shepherd divides the sheep from the goats. Where are the people of Israel going to be? Where are the Jews going to be? They're all going to be already in the kingdom. To the Jew first, and then to the Gentile. You see, folks, regardless of what your preacher taught you. And he shall set the sheep of the Gentiles on his right hand, but the goats on his left. And then the king shall say unto them on his right hand, Gentiles, come ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Why? Because you gave these, my people, food, clothing, water to drink, a place to stay, clothing, took care of them when they were sick, etc. That's the reason. So we go back to that, Matthew 24. I need to get back to Strong's Concordance so that I can go back and forth without doing all this. He made the Romans ruler over all his goods. He made the Romans ruler over his household. And what they were supposed to do, they were supposed to give the people, the Jews, meat in due season. But did they do it? Some did. A lot of them did not. Verse 48, but if that evil servant shall say in his heart, my master delays his coming. Well, 1,000 years came and went, and there is no return. No, the Messiah hasn't returned. And then what does he do? He began to smite his fellow servants, who he was supposed to share jointly with. And then he began to eat and drink with the drunken. The master of that servant shall come in a day when he looks not for him, in an hour when he is not aware of, namely the hour of temptation, and shall cut him asunder. All right. Following the disappointment of Jesus' failing expectations of the second coming at the year 1000, anti-Jewish persecution became increasingly organized, focused, and intense. Massacres grew more common, and entire Jewish communities were destroyed by fire and sword. The first recorded massacres targeted the Jewish community of Orleans in 1009, followed by 3 years of massacres of Jews in Rouen and I'm sorry, I can't speak French, folks, but you can see the words here. Rome's Jews were massacred in 1012, and as if things could not worsen for Rome's Jews, a remnant were burned alive in 1021. By 1063, massacres spread to Spain, and in 1065, Lorraine's Jewish community was massacred. Between the Orleans massacre of 1009 and the anti-Jewish Nuremberg laws of 1935, Irvin Borowski and his foreword to Father Edward Flannery's 1965 book, The Anguish of the Jews, writes that in the past 1,000 years, 1 of every 2 Jews born in the world has been murdered. According to other historians, Borowski's estimate is conservative. The number of Jews murdered between those dates and this before the Holocaust, one study suggests that had the Jews not confronted persecution over the past 2,000 years, the numbers living today would be at least that of the population of the British Isles. I would agree. What then the lost 10 tribes? Beginning in the 11th century, Europe entered a period of radical social, economic, and political change. Kingdoms emerged. What kingdoms? The 10 kings, 3 of which were overthrown by the man at the Vatican, exactly as is written in the book of Revelation. Cities once located along the Mediterranean coast now appeared inland, connected by river and road. Usury, forbidden to Christians by the church, was necessary to finance expansion. Forbidden to own or even work the land. Who was forbidden to own land? Who was forbidden to work the land, therefore forbidden to buy and sell? Because they did not have the cross on their forehead or make it with their right hand. The Jew. Shut out from most trades and crafts. Those Jews capable became, by default, Europe's bankers. So now people today, sons of Japheth, put all their blame on Jewish bankers now. While most continue to live in poverty, serfs to landowners. Where are the lost 10 tribes? What are they doing? Let me tell you a little something, folks. The lost 10 tribes are not the elite in any land. They are the poor. They are not among the elites. It also fell on the Jews already identified with money to collect taxes and rent for their masters, a position that made Jews a lightning rod for resentment otherwise inspired by the landowners. While the niche of usury provided some Jews a livelihood, serving as moneylender to the wealthy was not without danger. Borrowing by the church and aristocracy meant that these institutions also accumulated debt, and the fastest way to erase debt was what? Kill the Jew. It turned out was to just be rid of the Jews. The year 1100 began 500-year long period of expulsions that not erased erased debt, but provided the ruler with the accumulated wealth of the community unable to carry out or forced to leave all property behind. Now, you see, with the incredible debt that the United States has and that the rest of the world has, you think that the Gentiles, namely the sons of Japheth, will act any different than they did before. No. And when the need for capital to fund war's development or war arose again, the writing here is not very good, the Jews would be welcomed back and the cycle would repeat. In general, Jewish communities expelled from southern Europe would resettle in North Africa. And yes, I have bloodlines on both sides of my family going to North Africa. While Poland was the destination of Central Europe, so they would, some communities went to North Africa and some went to Central Europe. Until now, the discussions had focused on the local level, Jews as chattel or cattle of their feudal lords at mercy of their equally enslaved and bitter Christian neighbors, but the church still faced the Jewish problem of Judaism and Jews surviving in the Messianic age. Yeah, the Messianic age that they thought would happen after the year 1000. According to church policy based on Augustine's formulation, the Jews were to be preserved as witness to Christian truth, to be encouraged to convert and to enjoy the benefits of Christianity. But with few exceptions, most Jews chose not to volunteer, resisted forced conversion even in the face of persecution. How encourage Jews to convert? Or how do you encourage Jews to convert when they wouldn't convert? The Dark Ages added 3 new techniques to anti-Semitic practices. One that had great historical impact is the designation of those who refuse to submit to forced baptism as enemies of the state and therefore liable for the death penalty. The second, while having less of a historical effect, seems more horrible in its immediate impact, was the forcible taking of Jewish children let's see here. Forcible taking of Jewish children and raising them in Christian homes or monasteries. The third was the establishment of local annual public insults of the Jewish population, usually during the Easter season. Is that what Paul had in mind in Romans 11? I don't think so. As it turns out, forced baptism, regardless of the degree of sincerity on the part of the convert, provided poor security, and for good reason. Such conversions are unreliable. Therefore, our suspect converts and even their children and grandchildren became under suspicion by the Inquisition. So baptism didn't help. Converts and their progeny, generations removed, were tortured until confessing insincerity and rewarded for the confession by being burned at the stake. Yeah, a lot like my forefathers were accused of being Jews and still burned at the stake. All right, and here comes number 2, the early solution by torture and fire. Crusaders' attacks on Jews throughout the Rhineland that spring 1096 amounted to Europe's rehearsal for the extermination of the Jews. Like I told you in the last video, the United States, and I'm arguing with some of my cousins right now. No, not the United States. Oh, yes. The United States taught the Nazis how to exterminate the Jews. In my last video, it's called, Did the United States or did America help the Nazis exterminate the Jews? You need to read it, or you need to watch it, or read the article that I was reading. The High Middle Ages was a period in which church influence within Europe expanded north and later pushed back against the Islamic expansion in the south. It was a time that advancing new approaches to solving Christianity's Jewish problem. During the first 700 years of Christendom, Jewish communities in Europe are rarely placed in direct physical danger. But the situation changes in 1095. Pope Urban calls for a crusade to liberate Jerusalem, actually Constantinople. Jerusalem was apparently an afterthought. Right. From the hands of the Muslims. On their way to Jerusalem, the Crusaders leave a track of death and destruction behind in the Jewish communities along the Rhine and the Danube because, as they exclaim, why should we attack unbelievers in the Holy Land and leave the infidels in our midst undisturbed? Over a period of 2 centuries, from 1096 to 1270, 10 crusades were launched, 2 of which were children's crusades. As the crusaders set off to their quest for their first victims were Jewish communities on the road to the Holy Land. In 1095, Pope Urban II proposed a crusade to liberate the Holy Land. The second part of his speech is less familiar, but it has strangely modern sound to it, reminiscent of Hitler's reason for launching World War II, Germany's need for Lebensraum. Yes, folks, Hitler's words came straight from the leader of Christianity, the second Pope. His words were, "This land which you inhabited, shut in on all sides by the seas and surrounded by the mountain peaks, is too narrow for you, for your large population, nor does it abound in wealth, and it furnishes scarcely enough food for its cultivators. Hence, it is that you murder one another. This is the reason why you murder one another. Enter upon the road to the Holy Sepulchre. Wrest that land from the wicked race, and subject it to yourselves, that land which the Scripture says floweth with milk and honey." No, it didn't start with Hitler, folks. This evil is ingrained in mainstream Christianity all over the place. And the hour of temptation is going to prove it. And so in the year 1096, the first of 10 crusades set off to liberate the Holy Land. Whatever the true motivation was, the impact of the crusades on the European Jewish communities was devastating. During the first crusade alone, tens of thousands of Jews met their deaths by the sword, fire, and drowning. Wow. Just like My ancestors were done that way. By the same people. In Regensburg, Jews were thrown into the Danube, described as a baptism to save their souls before dying. As the soldiers passed through Europe on the way to the Holy Land, large numbers of Jews were challenged. Christ killers, embrace the cross or die. 12,000 Jews in the Rhine alone were killed in the First Crusade. This pattern of murder would continue for 8 additional crusades until the 9th one in 1272. On May 29, 1096, some 800 Jews were murdered in Worms, Germany, while others chose suicide rather than subject their families to torture, rape, and murder at the hands of the Crusaders. You want to go ahead and carry that cross? You want to carry that cross still? You want to carry the cross of the Crusaders still? Because if you do, you have the blood of all of those Jews in the Crusades on your head. Did you know that? If you insist on carrying the cross of the Crusaders, you have the blood of the Jews on your head. In Mainz, Cologne, Prague, and many other cities, thousands were killed and their possessions plundered. Thus began a long period of persecution, expulsion, and murder, which only began to ease, if temporarily, with the gradual secularization of Europe beginning in the 17th century. The sack of Jerusalem. So Christianity was responsible for all the Holocaust, folks. The sack of Jerusalem, 1099, was led by Godfrey of Bouillon at the head of one of the Pope's armies. On departing for the Holy Land, he had sworn to go on this journey only after avenging the blood of the crucified one by shedding Jewish blood and completely eradicating any trace of those bearing the name Jew. On arriving in Palestine, as Hadrian would call it, in 1099, his troops breached the walls of Jerusalem, captured the city, and forced all the Jews of Jerusalem into a central synagogue and set it on fire. Those who tried to escape were forced back into the burning building. Several descriptions of Crusader atrocities have survived, the most famous known as the Mainz Anonymous. I shall begin the narrative, or past persecution may the Lord protect us and all of Israel from persecutions. This evil befell Israel. The errant ones the Crusaders gathered, the nobles and the commoners from all provinces, until they were as numerous as the sand in the sea. A proclamation was issued: whosoever kills a Jew will receive a pardon for all his sins. On the new moon of Sivan, the wicked Emicho, may his bones be ground to dust between iron millstones, arrived outside the city with a mighty horde of errant ones and peasants. He was the chief of all of our oppressors. He showed no mercy to the aged, or to the youths, or the maidens, the babies or sucklings, not even the sick. He even made the people of Jehovah like dust to be trodden underfoot, killing their young men with the sword and disemboweling their pregnant women. They encamped outside the city for 2 days. The leaders of the community now said, let us give him money and give him letters of safe conduct, so that the communities along the route will honor him. Perhaps Jehovah will intercede in his abundant grace. But they had already given away their money, giving the bishop, the count, his officers and servants, and the bribes to aid the Jews, but it was of no avail whatsoever. In the year 1211, a group of 300 Jews fled to Eretz Israel, meaning the land of Israel, from England and France. 8 years later, they too were murdered at the hands of the Fifth Crusade. The Crusades marked a shift of anti-Jewish persecutions. For centuries previously, anti-Judaism had been encouraged by the elites. The elites, folks. I keep telling you. With the 11th century, the atrocities committed against the Jews sprang from the people. And it was the people, peasants, neighboring Jewish communities who, out of the religious base intolerance, fear, and superstition, turned on the Jews during the years of the Black Plague. The Black Plague arrived in Europe from the Orient by way of the 14th century traders. By the time it ran its course, fully 1/3 of Europe's population was dead. Although the plague did not distinguish Jew from Christian, suspicions fell on the Jew, spreading the plague by poisoning Christian wells. The people and local leaders of Switzerland, France, Germany accused the Jews of poisoning wells. Most were burnt alive. In 1215, Pope Innocent III, or he should be called Guilty III, passed an edict that would inspire Nazi Germany in the 20th century. Jews were required to wear a yellow badge at all times. Burning of the Jews during the Black Death epidemic, 1349. In Strasbourg, a city not yet touched by the plague, 900 Jews were gathered together and burned alive. The period of the Black Death is extremely important to the history and development of anti-Semitism, as the plague killed thousands. An explanation for it developed that has had repercussions for the Jews down to the present. A myth was invented that said an international Jewish conspiracy aimed at the extermination of Christians was the cause of the plague. The Jewish leadership in Spain allegedly directed Jewish communities through Europe to poison wells and cause sickness and death. This is on the book called Grosser and Halperin on page 132. Of course, that was a lie. 500 years later, that myth would inspire the protocols of the elders of Zion. Blood libels represent one of the most grotesque popular myths invented by medieval Christians. According to this myth, prepubescent youths were kidnapped from their homes, tied up or nailed to a cross by way of mocking the Christian Eucharist. They were then supposedly stabbed in imitation of the wounds scriptures describe as suffering by, as they say, Jesus on the cross. As the boy was dying, his blood was supposedly collected as an ingredient in the baking of Passover matzah. In Spain, in 1491, Spanish inquisitors forced Jews to confess that they killed a Christian child. No missing child was ever reported that would ever correspond to this child or corroborate the tale elicited from the victims by the Holy Inquisitors under torture by suggestion. For example, confess that on this date you did X. The libel of LaGuardia occurred on the eve of the expulsion from Spain. Conversos were tortured till they confessed that with the knowledge of the chief rabbis of the Jews had assembled in the cave, crucified a child, and abused him and cursed him, as was done to, as they say, Jesus. The crucifixion motif explained why blood libels occurred at the time of the Passover. Simon of Trent, supposedly murdered in this fashion in 1475, was canonized by Pope Sixtus V on 1588, giving rise to a cult that continues to survive even today. Although officially disbanded in 1965 by Pope Paul VI, the cult apparently continues and may be accessed on Catholic organization internet sites. With this myth of rabbis plotting mayhem for Christians surviving in the protocol, so does the blood libel survive. The most celebrated modern blood libel involved Menahem Belis, a Russian Jew arrested on July 21st, 1911, for murder and mutilation of a Ukrainian youth. Acquitted after 2 years in jail, the peasant making the charge eventually admitted that his accusations were based on tutoring by the police. And 1 year after the liberation of Auschwitz, of the more than 24,000 Jewish residents of pre-war Kielce, Poland, 200 survivors returned to their homes, faced a pogrom inspired by a blood libel. 35 were murdered along with 2 Jews who just happened to be passing through the city by train. So you want to wear a cross? You want to wear the Crusaders' cross. Well, if you go and wear the Crusaders' cross, folks, then you have the blood of all the Jews in the last 2,000 years on your head. You want to make that sign with your hand? Then you have the blood of all the Jews on your head. Yes, folks, Christians did it. The sons of Japheth did it. They were supposed to be Israel's caretakers until the time of the Gentiles comes to an end. They did not listen to Paul. Because of that, the words of Moses are necessary. Deuteronomy 30. Actually, let's go to Strong's Concordance. Probably don't need to use Strong's Concordance, but I'll do it anyway. And it shall come to pass when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse. The curse did come because they killed the Messiah. But the Romans were not supposed to do what they did to the Jews. As we see here, we finally understand what this means. Who? That's a question mark. Who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his master has made ruler over his household? Was there any? Not among the Romans there weren't. That's the reason why it's asked with a question. To give them meat in due season. Well, I mean among the leadership. But among the sheep. In Matthew 25, the next chapter, those will be exposed. Those will be invited into the kingdom. Those of them who did provide for the people of Israel, provide for the Jews. Gave them food to eat, gave them water to drink, gave them clothing to put on their back, a place to stay. Those who covered for them. You know, kind of like Irene Good, if you want to look up her name. Or maybe Albert Goring, if you want to look up his name. Albert Goring was a drunken womanizer. But when his brother, his half-brother, Hermann Goring, began killing the Jews, Albert Goring, the good brother, sprang into action. He did the work of this particular set of verses. He was one of those faithful and wise servants. And he gave the Jews meat in due season. And because of that, he has a blessing coming to him. Even though he spent the rest of his days in poverty, which was so bad that the Jews who he saved had to feed him. So that Albert Goring is blessed. He has his reward coming. Even though he was a drunken womanizer. But if that evil servant shall say in his heart, my master delays his coming. And they sure did. And what did they do after the millennium? When the master didn't come, they began to smite the Jews. and killed at least half of them. Eat and drink with the drunken, and the master of that servant shall come in a day when he's not looking for him. And they think that the Antichrist must come first. What they don't know is they, the Christians, are anti-Messiah. They are anti-Israel Messiah. And because they believe incorrectly, when the real Messiah comes, they're going to believe that he is, as they say, the Antichrist. And they will come and try to fight against him. But first, they're going to be forced to hand over all the Jews. Now, previous videos I've talked about one way, and then I've talked about another way. They're going to be carried on ships, on flying ships, and brought over by the Gentiles. Then I thought, well, they're going to be carried over, gathered by the angels. Well, both can be true. Both can be true, folks. You see, apparently what is going to happen is the angels are going to come and force the leaders of this world to hand over the Jews or die. You got a choice. Hand over the Jews, hand over all the Israelites, or die. And when they're all handed over, the door is going to be shut. How he's going to bring the Gentiles over to him and proceed with Matthew 25 and the come ye blessed of my Father and have the kingdom prepared for you, I don't know yet. But the Jews and all Israel will be inside already. And the man at the Vatican will most certainly round up all the sons of Japheth, says the 10 kings, and to fight against him. That's what it says in the book of Revelation. So, hopefully this video has been helpful. What I'm trying to get everyone to understand is, you cross carriers, you that carry the Crusader cross, have the blood of the Jews upon your head. You do. And the only thing that's going to be able to save you is this. If while the Jews were under the care of the Romans, that you gave them something to eat and something to drink. Right here it says that, and then in the next chapter it says the same thing. Shall gather the Gentiles. And separate them, the sheep from the goats. Sheep on the right hand and the goats on the left. And then he will say to the sheep on his right hand, come ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world, because I was hungry and you gave me meat in due season. Yes. Inasmuch as you have done it to just one, that's right, one, that's what it says, of the least in size or dignity. Even one of the most worthless Jew, you gave him even a cup of water when he was thirsty. One of the least of these, my brethren, you have done it to me. And then you know what happens to the rest. Now, I've told you the truth. You can sit there and believe that lie that has been told to you over and over again, century after century, if you want to. That's your problem, not mine. I'm telling you the truth.